Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Christian's Ramblings. It's the series in which I'm rambling about different topics that interest me. So if you are not interested in hearing me talk, and I can imagine that, then don't watch this show. Today we're going to talk about if my views on learning how to play jazz guitar are controversial or not. The reason I'm making this video is because I read about my so-called controversial views a lot in comments on YouTube, on Facebook, sometimes in forums. People call my views controversial or questionable. And you know what? I can totally understand that. And just to make sure, before I start, I want to say something that I say often in videos. Sometimes I forget to say it, but this is always in the back of my mind. Everything I'm saying is just my opinion. It's just the opinion of one guy. It might be very far from the truth or the best way or the valid opinion, but nevertheless, I think it's important to know, for you as a viewer of maybe more of my videos, to know where I'm coming from and why I hold these views. So I have a couple of topics, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 topics. Those are theory, music theory, timing, specifically swing timing, fretboard knowledge, so knowing the notes on the fretboard, learning jazz vocabulary, so you could view that topic as talking about scales, modes, and talking about licks and phrases. And then the last topic is repertoire, learning tunes and how many tunes you should know, and topics related to that. So let's start with theory. Music theory. I have said often in videos that I think that learning music theory is overrated and that there is too much focus on this nowadays in jazz education. And I still hold that view, but sometimes I hear from people, you know what, you say that, but I watch your videos and there's a lot of music theory in it. You talk about this chord and that chord and the 2 and the 5 and the 1. And I have to agree, that is also music theory, but that is not what I call in-depth knowledge, right? It's not something you would think about, talk to other people, their opinion. This is just what I would call the grammar of music. It's like learning the multiplication tables or the alphabet. That's just something you have to know. It's not something you have to think about or calculate, something you just have to know immediately. Because without that knowledge, it's very difficult to talk about music. So you don't have to know that, but then it would be very difficult, of course, to follow my YouTube videos, or difficult in general to talk to other musicians in rehearsals. So to fight that problem, to counter that problem, I made one video called Essential Music Theory, and I will link that video in the description, so watch that. But the topics I talk about in that video when it comes to knowing actual music theoretical subjects is as follows. Knowing all the 2-5-1s, what are the chords in a 2-5-1? So for example, if we're in the key of C, then the 2-5-1 would be D minor 7, G7, C. Or D minor 7, G7, C6, or C major 7. And that's just something you have to know. You shouldn't think about that. And you have to know that in every key, both major 2-5-1s and minor 2-5-1s. So a minor 2-5-1 in A flat would be B flat half diminished, E flat 7, A flat minor. You have to know all the notes in triads. So F minor triad would be F, A flat C. And again, that's just something I know. It's not something I calculate. It's just something you have to memorize. You have to know all the notes in 4-note chords. So if I would say, what are the notes in a C half diminished, you should immediately say C, E flat, G flat, B flat. Or what are the notes in A flat major 7, A flat C, E flat G. Again, that's just something I memorized. So you have to memorize that 2-5-1s in every key. What are the chords in those 2-5-1s? What are the notes in those chords? And then also the notes in triads. The last thing I would also learn is the theory of dim chords. And that's a very specific thing for me. I'm not gonna explain it in this video, but watch that Essential Music Theory video. There's chapters and you can immediately click on the chapter. And I also cut out that chapter as a shorter video, which I will also link. So let's go to the next subject, which is timing. And I made several videos about timing, but the most important video is behind a paywall. It's only for my patrons, but I can explain it quickly. I don't believe in the teaching methods where people talk about playing laid back or on the beat or ahead of the beat and to address jazz timing in that way. I understand that's a thing, but I think that's a thing for people that already have good timing. It's not something that is part of good timing. When you are capable of changing your feel in that respect, you already have good timing. You first have to develop good timing. So what do I call good timing? Good timing is when you have control over the swing of your eighth notes. So with that I mean that if you have a group of 2 eighth notes, right? So let's say the tempo is 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are 2 eighth notes on top of beat 1. And then you can play 2 eighth notes on top of beat 2 and on beat 3 and on beat 4. So you would have 8 of those notes in the bar. 3, 4. If you have control over the consistency of that pattern, so that means that every long note in that group of 2, right? Because the first note is longer, because I'm swinging them. Long, short, long, short, long. Every long note should be the same length as every other long note. And every short note, so the second note of those group of 2, should be the same length as every other short note. So it shouldn't sound like this. You know, now some of the long notes are longer than other long notes. Sometimes the long and the short note are the same length. That is an inconsistency in string rhythm. And lots of problems in timing start with this. It can be a small thing, can be a small, not something that you can point to directly, but many people would say, I'm rushing or I'm not swinging. Usually the problem is here, is the inconsistency of the swing eighth note. So to develop that, I have my metronome system, and I will link to a video with that. It's very important to focus on this, especially with the metronome. And the metronome is not there to teach you timing in some way. It's to check if your swing eighth notes are consistent. Because if you have consistent swing eighth notes, it doesn't really matter on which beat you put the metronome. It could be every beat. It could be beat 1 and 3, or 2 and 4, or only beat 2, or only beat 4. If your string eighth notes are consistent, then you should always be together with that beat. It doesn't matter where it is. So the ultimate test is to put the metronome on those different kind of patterns and see if you can still have a consistent eighth note timing. If you start messing up, it means that probably somewhere you are not playing consistent string eighth notes. And especially on guitar, it's difficult because of the different picking patterns. Sometimes you're sweeping, sometimes you're playing alternate, sometimes you're playing multiple downstrokes in a row, or maybe multiple upstrokes, depending on what your picking style is. And then it's very easy to lose this consistency, because now you don't have a consistent motion, but you still have to have consistent sounding notes. So let's say you play something like this. So I have 2 notes alternate, down, down, up, and now I have 3 notes that are played with a sweep. But I should still hear long, short, long, short, long. It should not be the case that the sweep notes all of a sudden are losing that swing. It's very difficult to do this with 100% accuracy on the guitar. It's very, very difficult. That's why many guitar players have a problem with timing. I can have a problem with timing too, especially when it's phrases that I didn't specifically practice the consistency in the string eighth notes on. And I made several videos about this subject. I will link one such video in the description. But working on the consistency of your string eighth notes should go above everything else. Once you have that consistency, or when you listen back to yourself, you can hear that it's consistent. Now you can start worrying about, okay, maybe I want to play with the feel. But usually that is an easy thing after you've developed consistency in your string eighth notes. So I'm not sure it's a controversial view, but it is certainly a view that I don't see a lot of people talking about. They usually talk about laid back and ahead of the beat or on the beat. And usually these people that talk about it, they already have good timing. So for them, that is the issue, right? How can I change my feel? But people that are watching it usually have problems that go beyond this aspect of timing. The next subject is fretboard knowledge. And many people state that it is absolutely necessary to know all the notes on the neck. But I have the view that you should only learn the notes to start with on the high E string, the low E string, but those are the same notes, that's easy, and the A string. You should start with those 3 strings, and then you should start learning to play jazz. And that is part of what I call the Van Hemert system, and I have many videos about that too. It's in the linked video, and also I have a book coming out about it. And in the book I also use that principle of knowing the notes on those 3 strings. Now later on you could maybe learn the notes on the B string, and that's as far as I have ever gone. I don't really know the notes on the D and the G string. And then people say, wow, that's very lazy, why don't you just learn it? Yes, I could learn it, but why should I? I never use it, I never need it, right? I can do everything I want, including learning new phrases very quickly. without knowing the notes on those strings. So my philosophy is that I'm not learning anything that I don't need immediately. Depending on your methodology, of course, maybe you might want to learn the notes on those strings, but for me, not necessary. And it saves a lot of time to just start learning the notes essentially on two strings, right? The E and the A string. That saves a ton of time. It's easy to do because you already have to learn the notes on those strings to play chords, right? If somebody says play E7, you have to kind of know that the E is there, because otherwise you would never be able to find it. Next subject, learning the language of jazz or vocabulary. So my view is that you should never learn a scale or a mode. Even though sometimes I do teach a scale, but I always teach it in the form of a phrase or a lick. I never say something like, okay, learn the Phrygian dominant scale in every position. I would say, okay, let's learn this lick. Oh, and by the way, that is actually called the Phrygian dominant scale, but I see it as a lick and it starts for me on the third of E7, which is there, of course, it's G sharp, you know. So all the knowledge comes together because I know E7 consists of E, G sharp, B, D, so the third is G sharp. I can find that note on the high E string, and then I have a lick that starts on that note, and I just memorize the fingering, and then I say, okay, it's a Phrygian dominant scale. That's just a theoretical bit of information that I give to make my videos a little bit more complete, but it's totally not necessary to know that. What is necessary to know is this fingering pattern and that it fits over E7, for example. So all my teaching is about learning licks, or if you prefer, learning phrases. Some people like that word better. For me, it's the same thing. Now the question is that really controversial? In today's world, it might be. That's because there's many methods written and teachers that focus their teaching on learning skills and modes. And that works, obviously, because there's many great players that use that. But if you go back to the early days of jazz, let's say you go back to the swing era, do you really think that the musicians in that era really had any idea of modes or all those scale names? I don't think so. If you listen to, let's say, the quintet of Benny Goodman, so Charlie Christian, Lionel Hampton, Teddy Wilson, Benny Goodman, their playing is very riff-based. They know they have little riffs in the repertoire and they play with the rhythms, they play with the embellishments, and they're just copying the riffs from other players or from each other. So that's very much like licks. Only the difference is that riffs are usually shorter and are often repeated over many bars. You could also call it a motive. Now, if you go to the bebop era, do you really think these people were thinking about bebop scales or bebop rules? No, they were just coming up with phrases and then copying them from other musicians or teaching them the phrases, coming up with contrafacts over existing jazz standards, so bebop themes, and then thinking about the phrases and then learning those phrases. Nobody was ever trying to codify bebop. Now, I'm not saying that is not a good idea. Obviously, it's a good idea and many people use that. But the point is, it's not really controversial the way I teach it. That's probably the way the musicians in those times were actually learning and teaching the music. So, in today's world might be controversial, but probably not in the history of jazz. Another thing that is mildly controversial, especially among regular viewers of my channel and some patrons, is the amount of videos I produce and the amount of licks and phrases I talk about. It just seems too many to get a good focus. Now, I made a video about that, which is called Learning to Play Jazz Guitar is Like Throwing Darts, and I will link that video, so watch that video if you want my full thoughts. But the short version is that I have the philosophy that you should learn as many phrases and licks as possible, because you cannot expect most licks to stick. From every 60 licks, maybe 1 or 2 will stick. So if I would only practice 1 or 2 licks, let's say in a half year, I have actually very low chance of those licks being the 2 that actually stick, because they might not sit well with me or they might not fit with other phrases I know. So I like to learn lots of phrases and then I'll just see what sticks. Or to talk with the darts analogy, I will throw 60 darts at the darts board at the same time, and then maybe 1 or 2 will hit bullseye. Those will be the darts that the audience will see. Or in the case of the licks, I will practice 100 licks, but then 3 of them will actually show up in performances. Those will be the licks that the audience will hear, that I will be comfortable with. I would have never discovered those 3 phrases if I wouldn't have transcribed 300 phrases. And then there's this issue of how long do I study each lick? Well, I study every lick with my full attention, working on them diligently, paying attention mostly to the timing of the phrase, right, the consistency of the string eighth notes, and playing it clean, so that is a technical issue, and then trying the lick out on different songs until I get bored with the phrase. That's the exact time I spent on the lick. When I get bored and I think, okay, that's enough, I just switch to something else. And I might get back to the lick or I might not. I really don't pay attention to that. It's more about the work. That's another thing, a philosophy of mine. Only care about the work, not the result, right? So I work very hard on that phrase, on that pattern, or on the complete solo sometimes. And then, I might forget all of it. I don't really care about the result, I care about the work. Okay, last subject. And this controversy comes from the video I made with the levels chart. I have a chart with different levels you can occupy as a jazz player and how you could progress. And with the different levels, I have an amount of songs written. And it starts with like 20 songs when you're a beginner to 200 songs when you are a legend, a master. And some people say that's really not very many songs. I know people that know thousands of songs. Well, here's the real truth. I've worked with many legends and masters in my particular field of jazz, which is gypsy jazz. And I also worked with great players in bebop. In my experience, those people don't really know more than, let's say, 200 songs, like that they can play at any given time. And the reason is because they play concerts and gigs and they like to play more or less the same songs all the time, right? It's the songs that they have a special relationship with. They're not playing in a bar for 8 hours having to have a set list of thousands of songs. So the weird thing is that the people that know tons of songs are usually not the best players. They know tons of songs because they have to know tons of songs because they do gigs that last 6 hours. I don't want to mention any names, but big name players that only play concerts, they usually have more or less the same set list of 20 songs. So those songs they're very familiar with, and then there might be 100 songs more that they can also choose from. But that's pretty much it. There's no need to learn any more songs. Now, when they have to learn a new song, it will be very fast. That's another reason why you don't have to know thousands of songs. I can learn a new song within 5 minutes, if it's only the chords, right? If I have to learn the theme, it might take longer depending on how difficult the theme is. If it's a Lenny Tristano theme, it might take me a few days. But if it's just a string theme, it might take me 15 minutes, or sometimes it's even immediate because the theme is that easy. So there's no need for me to learn 500 songs. I think I might know 100 songs really well, right? So I can play those songs at any time. And then there's another 100 songs that I know that I maybe need to look at the chart once, or I have to watch one course. And that's it. If I have to learn new songs, I will learn new songs. But there's no real need to do that because I might never need to know that many songs. Now, when it comes to repertoire, I also want to talk about what is necessary to learn when you are learning a tune, depending on what instruments you play. I recently had a discussion about this with somebody who said, bass players don't really know any songs because usually they can play the theme. But let's think about it. What are the chances that you have to play the theme as a bass player in a concert? I think it's pretty close to 0% if you're not the leader of the band. But even if you're the leader of the band, it's got to be under 5% that you're going to play the theme as the bass player. The chance of you playing a solo in a song, maybe about 50%. If you're the leader, of course, it's going to be 100%, but how often are you going to be the leader as a bass player? That's a very rare case. So let's say 50% chance for you to having to play a solo. And what are the chances that you have to play swinging, walking bass lines? That's 100%. So what are you going to practice the most? You should be practicing your bass lines, your swinging bass lines the most, followed by solos, and don't spend any time on learning themes. Why would you ever do that? You would never need that. So knowing the song as a bass player means that you know the chord progression, that you can play great walking bass lines, that you can play great lines in two, and that you can play a good solo. That is knowing the song for a bass player. If you're the guitar player, knowing the song means you know the chords, maybe you know the theme, because that depends a lot on your function as a guitar player. If you play in a band, let's say a regular band, with a clarinet player or violin player, or let's say a saxophone player, and the saxophone player is playing the theme on every song, why would you learn the theme? There's no reason. Now, if you are playing in a trio and you are the lead instrument, of course you have to know the themes. So it depends a little bit on the situation you're in as a guitar player. I would look at it as that. Now, if you're a saxophone player, you have to know all the themes. and you have to know the chords. But is it really necessary for you to know all possible piano voicings as a saxophone player? No, it's not necessary, because you're never gonna need it. That's what I mean with being practical. Only learn something when you would actually have a need for it when it comes to repertoire. Which brings me to the end of this video. And I'm sorry I didn't really play anything. I did have my guitar because you never know. On Friday I will be back playing. We're gonna look at the great Django solo that he played on the 1940s recording of Les Jeux Noirs. And I hope to see you in that video, or maybe on Monday during an episode of Bebop Mondays. Until then, bye.